The people walking, the people talking.
So my name's John Briant. I'm a criminal defence barrister. As well as going to court, I've also been involved in representing people at the police station since 1995. I think I've probably represented about 15,000 people being interrogated by the police during that time. In terms of representing people, it seems quite strange to me because for certain crimes, the majority of people who commit them have actually been using a drug, but it's alcohol. And in terms of assaults and violent crimes, it's hardly ever anything to do with prescribed drugs. It's to do with alcohol. Most of the people who I see with drug offences, it's usually acquisitive crime, which means shoplifting. It can be more violent, so robbery. It's not that somebody who's using drugs is committing robberies because they're using the drugs, but it may be that they're committing robberies in order to pay for the drug. And the value of those offences, and if you think about the resources which are needed in order to deal with those offences, are huge. So you're talking about security guards in shops, you're talking about police officers dealing with arrests, you're dealing then with court time, you're dealing with defence lawyers, you're dealing with legal aid, you're dealing with probation, you're dealing with specific medical people who are dealing with drug rehabilitation. As a result of those, you're dealing with prison time. And the cost of all those are huge. We're talking about hundreds of millions of pounds a year. I've been doing this 25 years, and you soon start thinking when you're in this world, why are we doing this differently? Why are we doing this how we do it? What's the cost financially? What's the cost in terms of people? And what are the alternatives? And the alternatives are potentially we license, we register, we control. You can now obtain what would be prescribed or what would be controlled drugs through a pharmacy. They're produced by multinational pharmaceutical businesses who already produce either these chemicals or other chemicals which are in effect very similar, produced on a large scale, produced safely, produced without any harmful side effects, or not side effects, but without any harmful additives, which are part of the whole street culture of drugs. The issue is, even when you're dealing with the people who are committing the offences, the people who are using the drugs, the offences that these people are committing in order to get the drugs, we're then still not dealing with the people who are distributing the drugs. We're not dealing with organised crime. We're not dealing with production and illegal cartels at the sites in the countries where production is taking place. And by legalisation, potentially it's going to allow undermining of those further unlawful elements. So if poppy production is licensed in Afghanistan, if coca production is licensed in South America, then rather than cartels making money, we're helping to support a legitimate regime in those countries. We're supporting farmers in those countries. They're producing taxable income for the farmers in those countries. We're producing a taxable income in this country. The reality is that it's become clear after 50 years, 60 years, 100 years of drug use, is that people are going to use drugs. Like, they're not going to not use drugs. And we've made the penalties harsher and harsher, and people are still using drugs. And people are still committing crimes in order to get drugs. And the penalties for the committing crimes to get drugs are getting harsher and harsher, and more people are going to prison. But people are still using drugs. And so if the reality is that people are using drugs, then what can we do in order to try and minimise the impact societally? How can we minimise the impact on them personally? And, what are our options? if you had no income, if you were able to get what are now controlled drugs on a prescription like you would do normal medication, would that cost more money to the government in the long term, or would it actually be cheaper in terms of the reduction in crime, the reduction in policing, the reduction in all the aspects of the criminal justice system environment? So there seem to be lots of reasons to legalise and to control and to register. Well, why don't we? I think there's political will. I think there's the kind of media outrage of we can't, or paying for junkies, government paying for junkies drugs, that kind of headline. I think there's often a lack of understanding. So when people don't have experience of people who have been addicted to drugs, when people don't have experience of lives in which using drugs suppresses the emotional angst which allows them to get through their day-to-day because it's so dreadful. If people aren't clear about the type of people who use drugs, it's really easy to say they're useless or we can wash our hands of them. But the reality is that there are people from all walks of life who use drugs. There are people from really well-to-do backgrounds, and there are people from really poor backgrounds. I think one of the interesting things is it's usually the people from the well-to-do backgrounds are just better at hiding it, and because they have finances, they come into contact with the criminal justice system less. It doesn't mean that they're not using.
We had a quote from someone that said, "Rich people go to rehab and poor people go to prison."
I think that's absolutely right. It is, if you've got money, you go to the Priory. If you don't, you go to Pentonville. Like, that's just kind of how it is. And I think that's one of the difficulties with the criminal justice system is that although it might appear like it's this flat plane and it's supposed to be the same for everybody, the difficulty is if these people at the top are the people who don't have education or don't have income or don't have privilege, then basically what happens is it comes like this, and they're the people who get caught up in the justice system before those who have privilege. And at what point are people going to start being pragmatic about it? Are people going to start being in, this is a problem, that rather than it being we need to wage war on the people who are using drugs, we need to start engaging with them as people, as human beings. And there are going to be people who are using drugs who do it because they enjoy it. And there are loads of reasons why people are using. As long as they're criminalised, and as long as we treat them as not okay, it becomes impossible. Like, it's impossible to engage with them. They just become barriers and barriers and barriers which get in the way of providing support for those who want it. Because although there will be people who are in the space of I want to use because it's something which is enjoyable and something which I like doing, there are always going to be people who are the same as people who smoke lots and want to stop. And it's incredibly, incredibly hard. And think about all the products which are there for people stopping smoking and how much we spend on subsidising people stopping smoking. Why should it be any different for heroin, or why should it be any different for crack? Rather than arresting people, why don't we pay for nurses? Why don't we pay for doctors? Why don't we pay for therapists who can support and assist those who actually do want to change their behaviour? And for those who don't, why do we make it so that it's just a whole lot safer? It seems that some moral outrage and the ability to point the finger and say, look at these people, or look at how bad those people are, or have our righteousness or our moral high ground about ourselves and about who they are. It kind of allows people to feel better about themselves, I think. And from dealing with the thousands of people who I've dealt with who use over the last 25 years, like they're just like everybody else. That's it. They aren't any different to anybody else. The same as people who drink, the same as people who smoke, the same as people who drink coffee or don't.
Yeah, it's interesting because alcohol or nicotine or caffeine, even like you say, it's so socially acceptable that there seems to be this line drawn in people's minds that if you use a different drug, a drug that is currently illegal, that there's a moral implication that you're immoral in some way, and the use of that drug is for some reason different to the use of alcohol or nicotine.
But it means something about, it does, like it means something about who you are, it means something about your character, it means something about the type of person you are, it means something, about where you're from or what you do or who you are. And it's just because somebody decided these things are legal and these things aren't. And as soon as, my thought would be that as soon as those lines are changed, after a period of time, there'll be no difference between those things and alcohol, or those things and nicotine. It's not that people like people smoking. Like, most people don't like that people smoke, but it doesn't mean that it's something that people should be
imprisoned for
or crucified for, morally crucified for, right? And the reality of the job that I do and the stuff that I see is I don't see people using drugs, pushing people to the floor and kicking them in the head so hard that their eyes pop out, using anything other than alcohol. And that's the reality. The reality is most of the worst things that happen, most of the most gruesome, most horrific offences that I deal with are fueled by alcohol.